And as you've just heard, this is indeed the 7th edition, and we are proud to say that this is the record one in terms of registration for the inaugural day. We've got 1,500 delegates in person and 500 online. We do continue to keep the inaugural day in Paris Infra Week as a hybrid event to make sure that as many of you as possible could join us and join these conversations. We do have a new feature in the 7th edition. Paris Infra Week is the unique occasion to network, so we have launched a platform called infranet.link. Do create your account if you haven't done so yet and try this networking. There's also the booklet, full day of event agenda, as well as the rest of the week, as 20 side events will be organized by the partners. And it is now time for the first plenary session of the inaugural day, which will focus on the new frontiers in infrastructure, which assets for which needs. And I'm inviting here on stage the moderator, Bérénice ARBONA, Head of Infrastructure Debt, La Banque Postale Asset Management, and the speakers.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I have the pleasure to moderate today this first roundtable, The New Frontiers of Infrastructure, Which Asset for Which Needs. Infrastructure assets are designed to meet essential needs of population. But today, those needs are evolving significantly and very quickly in light of the energy transition agenda. The shift from fossil fuel-based energy towards a net zero economy will become a reality only if the necessary infrastructure exists to sustain it. We need to build new renewable energy production capacity. We need to adapt existing infrastructures from brown to green. We need to scale new technologies such as hydrogen and carbon capture. We need to innovate with new digital technologies that can support electrification and energy efficiencies. Evolving needs means new assets, new technologies, new market, new business model, new risk. Who says infrastructure is boring? A successful decarbonization and energy transition strategy will need to accommodate new policies and regulation, account for new investment and new related risk, and adopt an unprecedented sense of urgency. We are lucky to have today in this panel representatives from all the infrastructure market players to discuss how these changes are impacting the way they are financing, operating, investing, or contracting their infrastructure assets. Gwenola, CHAMBON, you are the CEO and founding partner of Vauban Infrastructure. Xavier, GIRRE, you are Senior Executive Vice President of EDF. Amir, JAHANGUIRI, you are partner at the law firm Willkie, Farr and Gallagher. And Ilya, POLYAKOV, you are Deputy Head of Global Banking and Advisory at Société Générale. So let's start. Ilya, the first question will be for you. In its 2026 strategic plan, Société Générale has announced strong commitment towards energy transition. Can you detail those commitments and explain their impact on the way you will continue to finance infrastructure assets?
Sure. Thank you for your question, and very pleased to be with you. As you said, Société Générale has announced quite recently a new strategic plan, and infrastructure and ESG are at the heart of this strategic plan. Société Générale has been a founding member of the Net Banking Alliance Zero, and in this new strategic plan, ESG is put at the very core of the strategy. What is new compared to our previous commitments? You probably know that Société Générale was one of the banks financing renewables 20 years ago, and we've been always very active in this space. And we continue, of course, to finance and advise projects linked to renewable energy across the world. But with this new plan, we are making a step further. First, we have decided to take one of the most ambitious commitments among the banking community on reducing our footprint and exposure to fossil fuels. We have announced that we will no longer finance any new oil and gas, new fields, oil and gas, I underline this. And we have also announced that we will reduce our exposure to this upstream oil and gas sector by 50% as of 2025, which is very close compared to our 2019 figures, and by 80% by 2030, again compared to 2019. It's a major move, and as I said, one of the most ambitious targets among our peers. At the same time, we are stepping our commitments, redeploying our capital to financing and advising energy transition. In this respect, we have announced that we are creating a 1 billion transition fund dedicated to energy transition and infrastructure, out of which an envelope of 700 million of equity that we want to co-invest with partners into this sphere. This is something very new for Société Générale because we've always been a big lender and will continue to be an important lender and advisor for these kind of projects, but equity envelope gives us additional resources to be able to be more relevant with emerging players that are creating new technologies in this space, which require not only debt but equity at the very early stage. And this envelope will be dedicated to such emerging players which are developing new technologies. We also want to dedicate part of this envelope to what we call nature-based solutions, and nature-based infrastructure is also a topic that we think will develop further, especially in emerging markets. So this is a real step up in terms of our commitments to the energy transition topic. And finally, we have announced as part of this new strategic, our strategy day, a partnership with IFC to finance, amongst others, infrastructure in emerging markets. We all know that needs are huge about infrastructure finance in emerging markets, and this partnership will be dedicated to this.
Thank you, Ilya. Next question will be for Xavier GIRRE. Xavier, EDF raison d'être is to build a net zero energy future with electricity and innovative solutions and services. Can you detail how the energy transition agenda is impacting your business and on which solution you are working to meet the net zero challenges?
Of course, thank you, Bérénice, and I'm very happy to be with you today because, of course, as you highlighted, and as Minister Roland Lescure and as Augustin also highlighted, I mean, we are just facing a wall of investments that we all will have to tackle all together, and that's why I'm so happy to be with you today. Yes, of course, energy transition is impacting our business model. Because, you know, there is a strong need for more electricity. If you've read the report by RTE 2 years ago, Futur Énergétique 2050, you've noticed that their view is that global energy consumption will be cut by more or less 40% between now and 2050, but global electricity consumption will be increased between 20 and 30% between now and 2050, and as a whole, electricity will represent more or less 50% of energy consumption in 2050 against for 25 against 25% nowadays, meaning a doubling of the proportion. So it's something which is very significant to us. This means more electricity as a whole in transport, in particular transportation, and Augustin highlighted the need for decarbonized electricity in transportation. Today, transportation represents more or less 30% of global gas emissions. Residential buildings also, which represent today 20% of these emissions. So it means more electricity, more decarbonized electricity for the different sectors. First point. Second point, it requires also additional capacity of generation in renewables, in nuclear, and Minister Van Lescure highlighted that. France has decided to promote at least 6 EPR2 in the next years and decades, potentially 8 additional, which is very significant, both as regards technical expertise and financial expertise, and we will have all together to work about that. So more nuclear electricity generated, more renewables, wind, solar, hydroelectricity, of course. And third point, this requires also more energy efficiency. So within EDF, we offer different sets of solutions about that, as referred to in our raison d'être. And in particular, our subsidiary Dalkia is at the heart and at the core of this battle to develop energy efficiency, to cut also this consumption in order to be sure that this is properly consumed. So this is very significant impact on our activity. And as far as we are concerned, we invested during the last years more or less 15 billion per year. These days, more or less 20 billion per year, and the years and decades to come between 20 and 25 billion per year. So this is something very significant. And Roland Lescure highlighted the fact that in the next decade, the investments in France could be tripled till 50 billion per year. So we are clearly a part of this global move. And so that's why it's so important for us to be efficient in our investment decisions, to be in a partnerial mood, because of course we'll not invest alone all these billions. We, on a very regular basis, structure financing projects with you, investors, and this is key to go on. And of course, what will be key also is to go on recruiting and being very, very, very attractive also to young people, to expert people, because it's not only a question of finance, I'm sorry about that, but it's also a question of people, and it's very important to be able to attract them for the decades to come. So yes, a very significant impact on our business model.
Thank you, Xavier. Amir, as a lawyer, you have a front row seat to track changes in the asset class. Can you explain what are your main findings in both OECD and non-OECD countries?
Thank you, Bérénice. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy that Augustin de Romanet rendered some cause to the presence of lawyers in this world, which is good news. If you look at the world between emerging markets and more developed countries, and I'm not sure that OECD actually means anything anymore, because the lines are kind of more scrambled now. What we're seeing in more developed countries is greenfield infrastructure projects are on the decline. And the reason for that is there's issues with regard to social acceptance. There's issues with regard to, and therefore would that lead to protester action. And there are also issues with regard to implementation of these projects, and actually even the challenge of the rule of law. A number of these projects that we have in mind are projects that have already been procured, have gone through a tendering process, have been approved, have been sometimes even been subject to referendums. People have later down the line not accepted their implementation. So that has created an issue with regard to the development of greenfield projects. I'm not only going to take French examples because France is not alone in this problem. There are problems also, we have the examples of Notre-Dame-des-Landes, obviously, which comes to mind, Ecotax, which comes to mind. A69 Toulouse motorway, which is currently putting people up the trees. So we have significant issues with regard to the challenge of the rule of law for those. But you have projects that have been suspended or canceled in Belgium, in Austria, in UK, with the HS2 project, which is a mix of financial planning and inflation, and also some protester action. The other trend that we see in more developed economies, obviously, is the energy transition and the huge surge in these. France had a very slow beginning, and now it took 10 years to get to commission the first offshore power wind project. But ever since, we've accelerated very largely. Within 1 year, we have developed in France 5 gigawatts of power. So it's huge, and it's happening now, and it's rolling. The other thing that from a legal perspective is noteworthy is corporate PPAs. So what we're looking at now is that we are now using different instruments to finance projects with less public support and with more corporate support. So corporate power projects, power procurement agreements are a feature of the development of new power being procured on the basis of commercial counterparties. Obviously, the emergence of green hydrogen is the other trend that we're seeing, and Germany is becoming one of the main actors and the champions in Europe. Decarbonization of brownfield assets is something which is driving the market. We've been seeing quite a lot of those. We've been seeing a lot of EV charging projects. We're seeing energy performance projects, renovation of households. Energy efficiency is the issue that we're there. And then last but not least, the very large industrial projects that we've come to call gigafactories, which are being rolled out to manufacture electric vehicle batteries, but also solar panels, heat pumps, etc. And very recently, there's the French example of Verco. With regard to emerging markets, I think we still have the same issue as the past, which is the scarcity of financing and funding. So what is still happening is that a lot of projects have difficulty getting financing. The development finance institutions and international finance institutions are still the main providers of financing to these projects. Very few infrastructure funds are investing in these countries. Most of the people around, I'm saying most, but not all, have a barrier with regard to non-OECD investment. So that's not happening. There are notable examples. Meridiam is one example where they're very largely one of the people who are investing in emerging countries, especially in Africa, in the area of infrastructure. In these markets, what is happening is there are a lot of renewable projects that are happening, nevertheless. Morocco is becoming a huge hydrogen and renewables hub. Saudi Arabia, with the NEOM projects, becoming one of the largest hydrogen producing countries. There's a project that was closed in Namibia just a few weeks ago, $10 billion. Obviously, there have been initiatives that have been very helpful, scaling solar by the World Bank Group, in developing renewable in Africa, Senegal, now in Central Asia and Uzbekistan. What I think is maybe what is going to happen is a lot of these countries are developing cheap renewable power, and also through the development of these projects, they're also learning how to do these deals. So what we're expecting to happen is probably some form of what happened with telecoms is some form of a technological leap, which is basically, we never had time to build refineries or a number of the intermediate infrastructure, and we're now at a moment where we have made the leap to renewable electricity and digital. Maybe that's going to help in terms of developing the future infrastructure in these markets.
Thank you. Gwenola, infrastructure was highlighted during the IPEM conference in Paris as one of the winning asset class for LPs. Can you explain both from the asset and liability perspective, what are the new trends you see in the infrastructure equity market?
So regarding the equity market, I would say that it was an amazing year. I mean, probably one of the toughest for us all as asset managers. As you rightly pointed out, energy transition is great. It's actually fostering the appetite of investor. The regulation is just channeling massively allocation within LPs into those energy transition opportunity, which is great. But then, because of the interest rate increase, macroeconomic environment has evolved and therefore hit very significantly the capacities everywhere at investors, allocations. And the reason for that is that all of a sudden, the interest rate raising their exposure to the bond market was actually in distress. And therefore, as we call it, a denominator effect, they were artificially overexposed to the real estate classes. Among them was private equity, real estate, and infrastructure. So all of them have been hit very hard, which means that investors were really struggling to allocate further and really trying to manage their exposure. And so we had a kind of slowdown in the progression of allocation towards fundraise for everybody in the market, which has interestingly hit very significantly the number of transactions that were actively pursued in the market. So we've seen a slowdown in the private equity, which was really even a freeze, I would tend to say. Real estate was really hit, with investors having to take actions on their valuations. And then infrastructure was the last one, which was hit the less, but still hit in terms of allocations. And so what we have observed is that investors, interestingly enough, they have found solution to that by managing their allocation. So obviously they couldn't get their money back from asset managers because they couldn't sell their assets, facing a situation where we used to be in a market of it was a seller's market, because every time you were purchasing an asset, it was 6 months later, interest rates were even lower, so it's great. Now it's just the opposite, so asset managers are tending to keep their assets and waiting for better times, which means not sending back their money to investor, which is increasing the imbalance for them of having liquidity to actually channel into opportunities. So what they have done, which is super interesting, was trying to be active in the secondaries, which means what we have kept saying for many years, that the market of infrastructure at some point would become something like a financial product, really happened. And we have seen and observed 7 billion of transactions in its secondaries for the first time ever in infrastructure, which means investors have become super active in the secondary, selling stakes of funds into the market. And this is obviously creating a new shape in our market, because this means that infrastructure is becoming much more liquid, because actually investors have discovered that they can actually find people to purchase their assets, and there was not that much discount on these positions. So this is something super interesting, because it creates another way of dealing with infrastructure, and which is getting us some hope that it's reviving capacity for investors to reallocate in primaries or indirect. We are seeing lots and lots of banks. You guys are actually emerging the equity provider, but we are seeing also all of M&A banks creating their dedicated teams for actually managing those kind of secondary trades. So this is probably one of the major new trends observed this year, on top of the fact that effectively it's positive, this channeling of a capacity of investors into energy transition. The negative, I would say, would be that it's probably too much black and white, which means there are lots of assets which are really struggling to find money to be financed. As soon as you've got some remaining coal exposure, no way, nobody will want to actually finance you. It's getting really odd, I think, and probably the taxonomy has one of the negatives of the taxonomy is that it has created assets that are really struggling to get financed. And they need to be financed because we need to finance the transition, and not everything will happen in one day. So it has to be, through innovation, but also by financing the traditional, infrastructures.
From brown to green.
Yes.
Thank you, Gwenola. Ilya, we are talking about new technologies, new markets, new business model. And normally it's not really music to ears of credit committee people. So can you illustrate how those trends impact your bankability analysis from a banking perspective?
Yes, sure. I will focus on some major trends and will highlight three of them in which we see that as a bank which has always been active in infrastructure world, we can add value. So the first big trend, and we've talked about this already, each of us, is energy transition. There was a figure mentioned earlier today that just in France, 60 billion of investments are needed in energy transition per year. Worldwide, up to 2050, IEA considers that this figure is 100 trillion needs of investments from today to 2050. So it's really huge. It's of course a continuation of investments in different types of renewables, but also it is about projects of energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is a big topic. We see more and more projects around energy efficiency. New forms of PPPs are emerging to finance energy efficiency. In France, one interesting example, recent example, is CHAMBON, a concession which was made to finance the energy reduction consumption of a new building of the Ministry of Defense. It's a good example of a new way to finance energy efficiency. The second big trend we see, and we also talked about this already today, is everything linked to electrification of mobility usage. Here the investment needs are just huge, mainly to finance gigafactories of batteries and charging infrastructure across the world. Here we have some real examples of transactions which are taking place. Vercors, which was mentioned by my colleague, is a great one. Société Générale has been advising this project from the start, and we are proud that they raised the required package of financing and equity just a few weeks ago. Overall, we see more and more projects and investment needs in this sphere. We are having half a dozen of projects on gigafactories and charging infrastructure that we are currently advising on. And we see these projects where a lot of big players from different sectors are joining forces to finance this equipment needs. A third trend I would highlight is everything linked to recycling. This is taking new forms such as chemical recycling, and this is also something that banks will need to finance and also probably funds. This is creating challenges, as you said, for credit committees, because any new asset class or new technology is always difficult at the beginning. But as we are all convinced that this is the way forward, and we are putting a lot of commitment there, we think that progressively this asset class will be the winning one, and we are planning to allocate most of our capital to this kind of projects.
Thank you. Xavier, you say that EDF will have to increase significantly its investment over the next few years. However, currently, one of the current bankability issue in the infrastructure sector is the volatility of energy prices. What can be done to tackle this volatility and to offer to investors the long-term perspective we want to have on cash flow?
Yeah, of course, it's a key question, because if you don't have any visibility, you can't have any investment. For bankability reason, for the ability to raise debt, of course, you need visibility. And on the one hand, you need to offer very competitive electricity, because electricity is at the heart of value added of plenty of companies, in particular industrial companies, electro-intensive companies, but not only them. Plenty of SMEs need to get access to very competitive electricity. And it's also the case for households. In the current context of very high inflation, they all look for competitive electricity. So the gist of the case here is to find the right balance between competitiveness that you must give to corporates and households, and visibility in order to incentivize investors and industrial corporates to prepare the future and to invest in the new assets, for example, EPR2, or to extend the lifespan of current nuclear generators, or to develop new electricity generators, and not only in the frame of dedicated frames like PPAs, but I mean on a global basis. So this is the current gist of the debate. So where are we today? I mean, today really we are at a very historical moment when we have an opportunity to change the current situation. The current situation is characterized by two key elements. On the one hand, you have a strong link with the gas price, so between electricity price and gas price, on the basis of what's called the price of the last called-in factor at the marginal cost, being currently the gas generators. So, and this led to very high volatility during the last 2 years as a whole, in particular. And you can remember summer in particular, autumn and winter 21 and then 22, when the gas peaked and electricity price peaked as a consequence of this link. And second pillar of today's situation is what's called in France the AREN, the mechanism by which EDF has to sell at a discounted price part of its electricity to other players in order to stimulate the competition in the downstream business, which was the goal of this decision taken in 2010, so almost 13 years ago, for a temporary period of 15 years, so ending end of 2025. As a consequence, I mean, the market has been opened. And today, for example, EDF operates only 50% market share in the B2B market. So obviously, the market has been opened. But these two key elements, the AREN on the one hand and the link with the gas price on the other hand, has led to two significant drawbacks. On the one hand, you had this volatility that you highlighted, Bérénice, which of course is very painful to all the stakeholders, including the consumers, who cannot predict their business model, who cannot predict their family budget, and of course this is very, very painful. This has to be reconsidered. And on the other hand, the second drawback is that this current frame didn't incentivize investors to invest. Because, I mean, for some of them, they get electricity at a cheap price without investing. And for the other one, like EDF, for example, they have to sell their electricity at a cheap price, very, very, very cheap price, which, of course, is disincentivizing the ability to invest. So volatility on the one hand, no investment on the other hand. And we need stability, predictability, and investment. So clearly, it's a key moment to redefine that. And I think that it's a great moment to set a new frame based on a long-term perspective via, in particular, long-term contracts. And you've seen that there are some discussions about that, some opportunity to get there, which would, of course, give an opportunity to disconnect this long-term price with the gas price and the marginal cost price, first point. And second point, of course, it's also appropriate and possible to have, at a specific level to be defined, a possibility to capture extra profit, to redistribute it, to guarantee to all the customers that they will be able to have competitive and visible long-term prices. So I really think that it's the great moment to make an historical forward step.
Thank you. Great moment to have new regulations. Amir, can you comment on French or European regulatory initiative that can support emergence of new asset class, or that can also help to accommodate evolving needs for infrastructure assets?
Thank you. I won't get into the detail of the regulatory framework which is being developed, and I think during the the course of the day, there are quite a lot of people who are going to be focusing on very specific regulations. So I won't go through the list, but I'm going to make a number of comments on what's happening. I think there's a transformed regulatory framework which sets out very ambitious climate objectives, and everyone is now facing that. And this is being implemented through European legislation and national legislation. The general impression is that the industry players who are here must be prepared for a future where there's more regulation rather than less regulation. The E in the ESG, environment, will become more important and more focused and monitored. The efforts for against greenwashing is also going to be substantial. I'll take an example, which is quite interesting, and it's a bit of an anecdote, but today the definition of green hydrogen is no longer hydrogen which is produced through electrolysis using renewable electricity. It has to be renewable electricity that was readily available and which would not have otherwise been used to be fed into the network. So it's a slightly more complex definition that we had before. I think one of if we're looking at the objectives of regulation, I think as a practitioner, what I would say is that regulation should be there to enhance further development. Further development of what? I think in some instances we feel that public financial support is needed for projects and should be regulated in favor of projects where technology or market risk is too high. So in those instances, we feel that there should be further regulation. The other, and I think we should also, with regard to this approach, learn from successful precedents. I'll take a comparison between Germany and France in two areas: telecom fiber and EV charging. Telecom fiber was deployed in France in a very efficient way through regulation, which was a regulated approach of having local authorities taking public initiatives for deploying of fiber telecom, which was not the case in Germany, where it was much more chaotic. And unfortunately, we haven't had that same approach with regard to EV charging. Germany has taken a very specific approach, which is to procure initiatives which are regional in order to deploy EV charging infrastructure, whereas in France we haven't done that yet. So maybe there's space there to some thought with regard to how to better approach this in order to be able to deploy in a more concerted, in a more probably smarter way. I think there's also probably space for regulation in areas where we can make better usage of existing infrastructure. As we've seen in France, for example, we're having difficulty deploying new greenfields. So I think what we now need to concentrate more on is how to make better use of what we already have. And what we can do as another example is to implement better use, for example, of our rail infrastructure, which is great, but which is not still very open to newcomers. And what we're seeing is a push for long-term rail capacity contracts, which would enable newcomers to be able to run passenger service on the national network by financing on the back of a long-term contract their trains, and be able to provide service. As we all know, as users of the rail service in France, the passenger service is saturated. If you want to go to somewhere in the summer or during the holidays, you want to go to the Alps, you have an issue with regard to getting a ticket. It is a real issue. So I think if you look at that, again, there are good examples of success in Italy, UK, or Spain.
Thank you. Gwenola, last question for you. We see that there is a changing landscape in infrastructure. What would be today your definition as investor of infrastructure assets? Are you still financing motorways, car park? And if you are investing in some brown assets, as you were saying, sometimes it's not black and white, it's also sometimes gray. what can you do on your side as equity investor to support the evolution of the business profile of your assets?
Thank you for that question. So first of all, to answer the first question, because there was a series of questions. First, what is the definition of infrastructure? I think it's an infrastructure is something that is actually answering the essential needs of communities, and it has gathered features that initially attracted investors, which were predictability, contracted long-term cash flow, situations of monopolistic situation, and correlation to inflation, and decorrelation with GDP. So these are the very key features defining infrastructure. And then, does it encompass different kind of things? Yes. The definition clearly is getting larger and larger, and the reason for that is that our way of life is evolving and we have to adapt. When you think, if you roll back the clock a little bit and then you remember that back in the very beginning of the 19th century, only 10% of the population on Earth was living in cities. Then it came to 30% back at the mid of the 20th century. And then when we look back in 2007, that was when basically the world became an urban world with more than 50% of the population actually living in cities. And what we expect now is by 2050, so basically less than 30 years, we will have close to 80% of the population living in cities, which means we have major needs to address all this urbanization increase, major needs in infrastructure. And I agree with you when we say we also need to adapt existing infrastructures. And so you're very right mentioning motorways and mentioning car parks. I mean, what are the future of these? Well, they are actually evolving and adapting themselves. So for example, when we take motorways, we are putting EV charging all around the road, but it's not sufficient. We are actually addressing the fact that vehicles are going to be electrified. But then when you think about, people traveling during summer, there might be, tons of people waiting and queuing just to charge their car. And it takes 20 minutes to get your car charged. So it doesn't really work. So we have to rethink everything. And you have, for example, industrials working on new ways of working on the motorway with catenaries or with induction schemes that would allow to transform the road into a provider of electricity, which would also solve the issue about, having a fleet completely electrified and having to transform this infrastructure in a service provider. And I think these are one of the layers. Another example is, as you rightly pointed out, what about car parks? Well, car parks are evolving. We have faced a situation where basically 10 years ago, it was not really glamour to be actually a shareholder of car park. We are shareholder of Indigo, and trust me, they are becoming major actor in urban adaptation and mobility. So what do? They have actually installed EV charging for cars to come during the night and do the long-term charging. We are also transforming the first floor to actually address the needs of last-mile logistics, because they are desperate to get access to places to actually have the capacity of storage with the inner city. We are also adapting ourselves into transforming these car parks into apps, which are easy for users to drop their car, take then a bicycle, and then go into the city. So basically, becoming a tool for public entities to address urbanization and ways of people to actually move within the area of the city. And that is really how our infrastructures need to evolve. We need to adapt them, we need to digitalize them, decarbonize them, which these are major needs in front of us effectively.
Thank you, Gwenola. Maybe to conclude, we are just on time, so still time for a last question and prospective questions. This panel was about the new frontiers of infrastructure, and maybe we can try to have a prospective exercise. And can the panelists say who will be the next frontiers in infrastructure by 2030, sorry.
Okay, okay, thank you. I will give you two new frontiers. First, a technical one. I think it's key to develop all the carbon capture technologies, CCUS, to go from brown to green. And second, still as a technical new frontier, to develop storage, because the sustainability of the whole electricity system is absolutely key. We could dedicate one day of debate about that, and it has to be improved via storage. So first, technical new storage, CCUS storage. And second, new frontier, financing one, which is, I think, a great opportunity for all investors in the room, which is to contribute to the financing of Sizewell C, which is the new nuclear project in UK, which is currently being tendered for private financing by HMG, and which is backed by both a government support package and a RAB mechanism. So this is key opportunity for you, so a new frontier for you.
It doesn't really imply a legal answer, because obviously, as lawyers, we've been doing the same thing for many years, which is just basically providing advice and tailoring our advice to what's happening. Honestly, who would have said 7 years ago what the new frontiers of today are? I mean, when you look back 7 years ago, none of us in my profession were thinking of gigafactories as projects that we'd be working on. So I think what's happening right now is that there's a large infratech community which is going to be defined what the new frontier is going to be in 7 years.
Thank you. Ilya?
I will name also two as Xavier, one on which I will not be very original. It's hydrogen. We think that by 2050, around 80%, 18% of world energy demand will be satisfied through low-carbon hydrogen solutions. And second one, a bit probably more longer term, what we call nature-based infrastructure. And I would like to thank our great moderator for being almost on time, Bérénice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Gwenola, maybe your next new frontier? Thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists for this great debate.
And thank you very much to the moderator for the first plenary session. I'm going to remind you that if you want to join the conversation, and we do encourage you to do so, you can join in using the hashtag #ParisInfraWeek. You could see it there, and please do take a look at the program. Well, that's what I call networking. Thank you so much. That was the first plenary session, and we are going to have the second plenary session here on stage right away. And I'm going to invite here the moderator for the second plenary session, ESG regulatory backbone, how to channel the funding, and the speakers. Dear participants, dear delegates, please take your seats. We're going to continue with the program.